Jasmine Crockett. That was kind of a surprise.
I have no
It's not
words.
a surprise if you've been watching the news, Andy. She's been everywhere.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Wednesday, July 16th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics president and co-founder Tom Babin and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So yesterday we got what some people view as sort of a scorecard on how politicians are faring, at least how they're doing in the money game. It was the deadline for filing campaign finance reports with the Federal Elections Commission. And we learned a few things, including that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez continues to burn up the field. She raised $5.8 million in the second quarter of the year. This is in addition to the $9.6 million she raised in the first quarter. So Tom, what do you make of these new filings? What does it tell us, if anything, about the state of politics today?
It tells us that there's a lot of money in politics. It's something that we already know and have known for some time, but the numbers just keep getting more and more staggering. You know, we just saw $100 million spent on a Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin. We saw, I don't know how many, it was over $100 million spent in South Carolina for Lindsey Graham's reelection. Jamie Harrison raised all of this money. And we see that now. John Ossoff he raised something, an incredible amount, I think 10 million or something. He has in his account now for that Senate race. And you have a lot of Democrats that are raising for these primaries in these open seats in Michigan, for example, and Minnesota. Obviously, Republican House members who are vulnerable. Mike Lawler was a top raiser. He's defending in the Hudson Valley district in New York 17. And these Republicans that are in tight districts, they've all been able to raise a lot of money. And that's not even counting the outside money that's coming in. And then one last thing I'll mention is the Democrats look like they've got a serious advantage in Virginia, in the Virginia governor's race. Spanberger outraised Sears by like 2-1, and Democrats have poured already $13 million into that race to only $3 million for Republicans. So that is going to be like an early omen of things to come. And it looks like Democrats certainly are flush with cash.
Spot quiz, gentlemen. Who said money is the mother's milk of politics?
You've asked me this before, and I don't remember.
I used to think it was Mo Udall, but I believe now, Carl, I've been corrected enough times. I think it's Jess Unruh.
It's Jess Unruh. Big Daddy
very
Unruh.
Good.
Big Daddy Unruh.
Very good. Political boss in California. That the tip-off was that it would be a Californian because I asked the question, right? Look, we're awash in mother's milk. We've got an ocean of it. Andy, I look at that. I had the obvious question. You mentioned AOC. She doesn't need any of that money. She could win re-election in that district. It's 80% Democrat. She's nationally known name ID. Not everybody approves of her, but most people in her district do. So why is she raising money? Is there any other
to run
race
for president, Carl?
You
can't run for president with no money.
In New York, maybe a slightly higher, not president, but between House and president. Yeah. And so I'm putting a call to Chuck Schumer's office. I haven't gotten a return call.
Well, one thing that jumped out at me was Joni, We Are All Going to Die Ernst, as you know. She brought in a mere $723,000 in the second quarter, which fuels speculation that she actually is going to retire. Because if you're raising less than $1 million a year for your Senate race, or $1 million a quarter, you're just not trying, Tom. I guess that's the lesson there.
Look, 20 years ago, that would have been a spectacular number for an Iowa senator, right? Iowa's not an expensive state, but these days, even in Iowa, you can spend 5, 10, 15, 20 million on your election or re-election bid. And so that number did jump out as and everyone tries to read the tea leaves on this. And that will fuel speculation that maybe her heart's not in it. Because, these politicians, dialing for dollars is not glamorous. It's not fun. I think some of them may enjoy it, but I think most of them hate it. It's like cold call. It's like being a, cold call salesperson or something.
Yeah.
So it's not a glamorous part of the job. And if you are thinking about retiring or your heart really isn't in it, it's kind of like the last thing you want to do. So, but while we're talking about presidential candidates. Cory Booker was another one. He's got boatloads of money, doesn't need it for his race, obviously. He's clearly eyeing 2028. And so these guys are all sort of trying to, build these war chests to give them options for a presidential run. And I think Cory Booker's, he's at the top of that list.
Yeah. Jasmine Crockett, $2.1 million. That was kind of a surprise.
I have no
It's not
words.
a surprise if you've been watching the news, Andy. She's been everywhere. And she's now she's the darling on the left, right? Joy Reid says she's the exact kind of leader that the Democrats need. And she's been all over TV. And I mean, that's.
Well, she's accomplished exactly nothing in politics and private sector, but she's gotten on television because she's willing to pretty much say anything. She's the sort of their version of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And if you have a mailing list and you have the TV bookers like you because you'll say incendiary things, and you're on social media, you don't need the political party anymore. I mean, this is, David Broder wrote The Party's Over, I think, in the 70s. Well, we're really seeing, this is an example of that, where a backbencher of no distinction can break out of the pack, basically on television, social media, and then convert that into political money. That shows how things have changed.
Well, we talked about AOC. She had breakfast this morning with none other than Zoran Mamdani, who came to D.C. It was a closed-door breakfast, but he was going to meet up with the Democratic leadership. Tom, what do you think of the meeting, and what do you think the D.C. thinks of Mr. Mamdani?
Well, it's been interesting because Chuck Schumer has been doing this sort of delicate dance. Hakeem Jeffries, also the same thing. So you've got these. Meanwhile, AOC and Bernie and the other folks on the left have eagerly endorsed Mamdani's bid to be mayor of New York.
Well, they endorsed him in the primary.
Yeah. So this is so I think he's trying to, he's trying to win some of these folks over and assure them that he's not, left-wing radical, and I guess. And that's what he did. The Wall Street Journal had a report out this morning. So he met with 100 business leaders in New York and tried to reassure them that, he wasn't going to run them out of town. And also that he took questions about, and he said that he would discourage the use of the phrase globalize the intifada. Although he said he still agrees with the sentiment, because to him, it didn't mean, that phrase never meant kill the Jews. It meant, stop the killing in Palestine. And so he still agrees with the sentiment behind it, but he's going to encourage people or discourage people from using that phrase. So look, he's clearly now knows that he's the front runner, and he's trying to build a coalition and bring in some establishment folks and get some of that backing, more centrist backing, because he will need that, I think, to fend off, Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams or whoever ends up being the alternative candidate here. So that's what this is all about. And we'll see how well he does at that.
Carl, it just seems to me like the Democrats are going to fall in line behind him. I don't think they've got another option, do they?
Well, they have three other options. We talked about them yesterday. None of them exactly.
I'm talking about the Democratic Party.
Well, I don't know. Andrew Cuomo's still a Democrat, even though he claims he wants to run as an independent. His father was a mayor and governor. He was governor. They have other people, but I just don't think I don't see how they stop this guy. And then the problem becomes, and Tom talked about this within hours of the results up there in the primary. He may win New York, but if he's the face of the Democratic Party going forward, I think that complicates things in the midterms and certainly in 2028. And Hakeem Jeffries certainly understands that. He'd like to be Speaker of the House. Having a person who quotes Karl Marx being the mayor of New York, and who until yesterday was saying, using a phrase that is widely understood to mean kill Jews, until yesterday. That's just, how does that play beyond New York? I'm in agreement with Tom. Was the first one alerted me to this. I think it's a real problem for the Democrats. He has to do a little more than that, Andy. I think he has to, maybe these are their first steps. Maybe he'll keep going in that direction, but he has to act like a person doesn't scare you.
Yeah. Well, this is Mark Takano, I guess. He's a Democrat from California. I think he was in the breakfast. The News Nation did some pretty good reporting on this. And he said that he told News Nation one possible vulnerability for Mamdani is that people above 40 years old may have a different association with the word socialism. as some think of former communist leaders such as Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro. But he said, AOC says young people view it as meaning battling corruption and fighting for workers. Tom, do you think that they can rebrand among the Intifada and all the other rebranding they're trying to do, that they can rebrand socialism as just being, for the workers and fighting corruption?
We'll see. I mean, it's a bold strategy, as people like to quote from that famous movie Dodgeball. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see if he gets away with it. Look, there is clearly a generational divide over the issue of socialism, and we've seen that reflected in all of the polling data. Young people are much, much more amenable to socialism and its tenets and than older folks that make, as you say, Andy, different associations. And so he doesn't shy away from the term socialism. He tries to distance himself from the term communism, although while using language straight out of the Communist Manifesto. So politicians, oftentimes, this is the test they face, right? When they make their way through a primary and, they move to the left and then, or the right, and then they have to sort of get back to the center. And you remember Mitt Romney was famously, his campaign said their strategy was he was an Etch-a-Sketch, right? You shake it and the slate is clean and you start from scratch. That also, while that may attract some people who weren't paying attention during the primary, didn't vote in the primary, it offends the people who voted for you in the primary. They don't want to see people sort of crab walking away from their positions and getting soft on the core tenets of the ideology that they've just voted for. So it's an interesting dance. It's one that every politician has to do, and we'll see how well he's able to do this.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to take a break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. We'll be back with more right after these words. Carl, there was this special election last night out in the 7th District of Arizona, and this was to replace the long-serving progressive representative Raul Grijalva, who died in March. His daughter, Adelita, won the primary and is expected to replace him in this, what is really a deep blue district. What do you make of her win, and what does it mean?
It's an old story. There have been, I think, 48 widows and wives who've replaced their husbands in Congress. The kids is a somewhat newer story, but not if you live in Michigan. I think John Dingell represented that district. He was representing the district when I got here in the 80s. His father represented it for 30 years or something like that. Now his wife, Debbie Dingell, a Dingell has represented that district in Michigan for 90 years or something like that. California, I covered a guy, Leon Panetta. You guys know Leon. When he was a House member when I got here. His son Jimmy now represents that district. There was a very capable liberal congressman named George Miller. His father was George Miller, and you weren't even always, there'd be these bills, you weren't sure. And he replaced him in the state legislature and in Congress. I once brought this up to Miller because I covered the California delegation when I first got here. And he kind of gave me a funny look. And he said, yeah, I remember your father. I was working for the San Jose Mercury News then. I said, oh, you know my dad? He goes, yeah, I met him when he was the Washington correspondent for the San Jose Mercury News. So there wasn't much I could say. So nepotism in Congress, in politics.
Carl's got a conflict of interest here.
Yeah. There's a glass house issue in journalism. There have been very magazine stories about, Ben Bradley and Ben Bradley Jr. In the old days, I used to show up in those pieces. It's a very common thing in journalism too, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, Tom, what do you make of the race? And, what sort of gave this race a little fizz, at least, was Deja Fox, who was this 25-year-old social influence person, I guess. I don't know much about her, but she was backed by David Hogg. And this is sort of the textbook example of what Hogg was talking about, where they were going to go into safe blue districts and replace old Democrats with new, improved Democrats. This is a little spin on that because they were going up against the congressman's daughter, obviously, but she got her she got it handed to her pretty badly. I mean, she didn't do very well in this one, did she?
Yeah, there was it was sort of played up in the press. You know, she'd written a Newsweek op-ed, and the press was sort of like, could this be an upset? Well, it wasn't even close to an upset. Grijalva got like 62% of the vote or something. I mean, it was a pretty thorough victory across the board. But look, name recognition is important. And we've already talked about Cuomo, for example. I mean, how did he even get to be where he is? Well, he had a well-established family name. And we've seen these examples over time. Remember Mel Carnahan from Missouri died in a plane crash. His widow, Jean Carnahan, ran and ended up winning that seat, or took that seat, I guess. So we've seen these examples, and Carl mentioned the Dingles are sort of the textbook case where they have, it's literally, the seat has been in the family for almost 100 years. And the reporting on this, the USA Today headline on this story out of Arizona was that the daughter wins the father, his seat. That was his seat. It's actually the people's seat. It's not an heirloom that gets passed along. But at the same time, I guess voters are they are conditioned to look at the ballot and recognize names and make associations if they have nothing else to go on. And so it's just sort of an unfortunate feature of our democracy that.
The greatest example was here in Virginia, where I live. Mark Warner, who's been there forever, but people don't remember this. He ran for the seat that had been occupied by John Warner. And people either thought it was the same Warner or thought it was his son. They're no relation. And Mark Warner had sought all kinds of office. He'd never won, but then he won that one. So sometimes it just helps to be coincidentally have the same.
I feel like Andy's going to take issue with me here. What?
I'm just going to, just for balance, Alita, I don't know much about her at all. I'm sure I will learn more, but just so people know, she's 54 years old. She served for 20 years on the school board in Tucson. She's been a county supervisor since 2020. So, it's not like she's been sitting at home waiting for her father to pass. I mean, and she claimed, she made this claim during the campaign that, she's out there and the name belongs to her as well. And I'll just put that out there for people.
Okay.
A little balance. Okay.
Well said.
Yeah.
But as long as we're talking about children, there was a certain son got back in the news. Hunter Biden, remember him? He decided to speak out. He taped this podcast with former DNC chair Jamie Harrison. There's no sound from it yet that I could find. But
it's not going to air till Thursday.
Yeah, so, but they did release some excerpts. I'm dying to hear the sound. But Tom, here's one thing he told Harrison. He said, "We lost the last election because we did not remain loyal to the leader of the party. That's my position. We had the advantage of incumbency. We had the advantage of an incredibly successful administration, and the Democratic Party literally melted down." Sage analysis from
I saw this and I'm like, we got to talk about this on the radio for sure. Look, all of that was true. They did have the advantage of incumbency. They did have what they thought was a successful record. And certainly, remember, Nancy Pelosi was, put him on Mount Rushmore. So Democrats certainly thought.
She only said that to get him to quit.
Stop. But then the debate happened, right? And even with the media sort of in their pocket and helping with this cover up, I keep calling it a cover up. It wasn't a cover up. It was more gaslighting. I mean, everybody kind of knew that Biden had acuity issues and stamina issues and all of that age-related stuff going on, and the media kept protecting him and gaslighting people and saying that it wasn't happening. So even with that, even with the media sort of working alongside of them, after June 27th, it was over. I mean, that's the reason the party melted down. And it was a good reason. I mean, Biden, that debate performance was a complete and utter game changer. It shattered the myth that he, was the sharpest guy in the room, all the stuff that his handlers all the BS that they used to push out. And so that's what caused it. So I'm glad Hunter thinks that's fine. But, he was in the bunker with his father during the final days, trying to fight for him to hold on. So I'm sure he feels like the party did him wrong. But quite honestly, I think Biden's decision to run again, even knowing that he was in that condition, was the original sin here that caused this meltdown.
Yeah. Carl, do you think it does Joe Biden's case any good to have Hunter out there defending him at this point?
Well, no, it doesn't. But Hunter, Hunter knows Jamie Harrison. He was asked to do it. I don't think there's some organized, campaign to do this. I think Hunter's just speaking from the heart. But he's about the last person to be objective, and he admitted. I'm sure he admits that in the interview. But he's leaving one really salient thing out, in addition to what Tom just said, which is that one of Joe Biden's problems was Hunter Biden. And these books that have come out have pointed out that even on days when he was lucid and in good shape, the president was obsessed with his son's legal troubles. He would look like he was going to prison. If you're going to talk about the party melting down, one of the reasons it melted down is because you, Hunter Biden, were out there making money in nefarious ways and getting your brother's widow hooked on crack and getting involved with gun charges and knocking up strippers and doing all these other things that didn't make your family look good, and at the very least made the president preoccupied with you instead of running the country.
Hey, Tom, we got about 1 minute left here. Is this the last we hear from Hunter Biden, or do you think he's back?
Oh, I don't think he's back, but it may not be the last we hear from him. We shall see. But I agree with Carl. I mean, Hunter Biden, we've had these figures throughout history, Bill Clinton's brother and Jimmy Carter's brother and these family members that
Richard Nixon's brother.
Yeah. But I don't know that we've ever had a son. And when Carl just goes through the list there, I had to laugh because it sounds
partial
like
list,
a partial list. Outrageous behavior that this guy engaged in when he was not sober. And then even when he was sober, he was, scheming to peddle influence and all of these things. So I don't think history is going to look kindly on Hunter Biden and his role in this whole affair and perhaps the Biden family overall.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You're listening to RCP on Sirius XM Radio, joined now by Charles McElwee, who's editor of Real Clear Pennsylvania. And if you don't know that site, you need to know about it. And not just every 4 years, because Pennsylvania is where it's at. That's what I want to talk to Charles about. We've got President Trump visited, J.D. Vance visited, and Selena Zito writes New York Post, a story we put on our front page, Charles, that there's going to be an industrial renaissance in Pittsburgh, centered around Carnegie Mellon University and centered on AI and these other high-tech things. Long way from U.S. Steel when the smog used to cover the city. So what's in the water in Pennsylvania? Why is it all happening up there?
Carl, it's like the zeitgeist state. Everything happens here anymore. And we saw it yet again this week in Pittsburgh with the announcement of bipartisan push among leaders on the Republican and Democratic side, and then, of course, President Trump about the $90 billion in investment in AI and tech in Pennsylvania among the numerous companies statewide, from data centers to infrastructure. And Pittsburgh is really repeating history here in the sense of it's a city that, let's say, post-World War II has never skated. And it has a unique civic culture where philanthropists and civic leaders respond for these phases of renaissance. The most recent being about 25 years ago with an eds and meds driven renaissance, including with CMU and Pitt. And now with this latest iteration that really emerged last year with the announcement of a $600 million investment in the downtown, which has really struggled in the past decade, especially post-COVID, with rising commercial real estate vacancy rates, that old buildings will be converted to residential. And now Allegheny County, which has lost 50,000 people in the years preceding 2023, that 5-year span, they're banking on Pittsburgh being really the AI tech hub for the state.
Is there a political calculus here in Washington in general and the Trump administration in particular, turning away from the Silicon Valley and towards Western Pennsylvania as it invests basically federal taxpayers' dollars in what's going to be, the next, as they used to say in the Valley, the next big thing.
It's fascinating because even in
the next killer app. That was the phrase, Charles, from my time in the Bay Area. Go ahead.
Well, it applies to the Silicon Valley itself too, because you have Congressman Ro Khanna, who grew up in Bucks County, and he is spending a lot of time in Pennsylvania as well, talking about the working class and really trying to give that center-left populist perspective. But certainly on the stage yesterday, Carl, we saw, if anything, a bipartisan audition. And I think there isn't any illusion that Josh Shapiro, the governor, for example, has presidential aspirations in the Democratic primary in 2028. But likewise, Dave McCormick has really positioned himself or molded himself in really the model of the consummate Pennsylvania moderate that we have long seen among U.S. senators going back to the days of Dick Schweiker. And I think it wouldn't be an illusion to say that McCormick may have national aspirations as well. So there's a bipartisan push right now among Pennsylvania elected leaders and nationally, this all-important swing state, to go all in on AI and tech. And we'll see, Carl, if that aligns with the local sentiment, these working class regions, if they share the enthusiasm for this push.
Charles, we talked about earlier in the show about Hunter Biden he's on a podcast with Jamie Harrison, and his take, and it may be unique, but is that the Democrats lost in 2024 because they abandoned their nominee, their president of their own party. They turned their back on Biden. Now you see why Hunter might say that, but it's an article of faith among many centrist Democrats I know, not just Pennsylvanians, that what happened in that campaign, that Kamala Harris should have picked Josh Shapiro, that would have strengthened that ticket, would have helped her carry Pennsylvania. She lost it narrowly. She lost all these swing states. But is that the perception where you live in Pennsylvania, that Shapiro would have helped the Democratic ticket, and that more generally, that's where the Democrats need to sort of recover their not just their identity as a working class party, but a party that's not hostile to Israel?
I think if you revisit the race, that even if Shapiro had been selected as a running mate, Pennsylvania was doomed electorally, and that there were enough, let's say, Biden to Trump supporters here, people in swing counties that were Obama to Trump, but then in 2020, out of a sense of frustration during COVID, actually begrudgingly voted for Biden. But in a sense, the events of Butler, the assassination attempt last year, was a cataclysm, not just for the enormity of what almost happened itself, but also how it shifted the race here. And I think after Butler, there were plenty of voters, even in suburbia, who were emboldened to vote for Trump over their intensifying dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party. And I think, if anything, Shapiro himself was relieved, or is relieved now, that he was not part of that ticket, because this is a guy who won Luzerne County, the pilot test, the ultimate county to understand MAGA in Pennsylvania. Shapiro won it in 2022. And I don't think that even with Shapiro on that ticket, he would have performed well with Harris statewide, and in turn would have hurt his future national aspirations.
Well, the county you're talking about in Erie County and some of these other swing counties in a swing state, you have people up there, if they're old enough, they voted for Ronald Reagan, they voted for George W. Bush, but they also voted for Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Trump once, maybe twice. So these are literally swing voters. Is there an issue or a set of issues that unites these people, that they're looking for every 4 years from the presidential candidate, and getting it sporadically, but not from the same party each time?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting period, Carl, because in a sense, both parties yet again are answering to their electoral concerns. And if you were to select one as a microcosm of it, it would be Luzerne in northeastern Pennsylvania, that you have an older population that voted for Obama twice, held no love for George W. Bush or the Republican Party in that era, and in fact may have been conservative and Democrat. And today is just looking for leadership that is aligned on their positions on immigration, economics, and also the military and foreign intervention. So, for example, you will encounter plenty of voters in Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, who did not love what happened recently with the strike in Iran, or they do have concerns about the big beautiful bill. In cities like Hazleton and Wilkes-Barre, where the poverty rate is more about 25%, and where 30% of Luzern's population is on Medicaid. The county itself is changing so dramatically, even at the demographic level. I mean, one of the most Hispanic areas in the northeastern United States. And I think that when you look at these places and the realignment itself is settled among party registration, the fact that Republicans are performing so much better in terms of voter registration numbers. But the state itself remains purple and competitive because the loyalty was always to Trump in these regions, not necessarily to the GOP.
Charles, we talked about Josh Shapiro. Let's set him aside. If you look at national figures and looking ahead, I mean, we just had a presidential election. I'm not, but Donald Trump may or may not be a long lame duck. He may figure out a way to run again. I don't know. But who are some of the people that are on the national stage that are a good fit with Pennsylvania? I mean, on either party, J.D. Vance would seem to be, to me. How about on the Democratic side?
It remains to be seen, Carl. I mean, I really couldn't name a current figure in the Democratic Party besides perhaps Kahana, who is not shy. It's not shy when it comes to podcast interviews. His approachability for profiles. He had what I found to be an illuminating one in Vanity Fair earlier this year, where he was essentially test piloting campaigning in Johnstown and traveling Western Pennsylvania, listening to voters. But when it comes to a figure like Kahana, I think that would be the test of, can populism from the left succeed in a state like Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm curious about that myself. Larry, let's switch gears. We got about a minute left. I want to ask you, put you on the spot. The Steelers, as they say, are going to have a new quarterback. The Eagles are champs. Do the Steelers have a chance to dethrone the Eagles as Super Bowl champions?
That's a polarizing question as I answer your question here just outside Philadelphia. Perhaps the Steelers still hold that historical distinction of having more Super Bowl victories. So, and certainly the mood this week alone is really centered around Pittsburgh, more so than Philadelphia.
All right, then I'll get one last sports question, literally 30 seconds. Carl Schwarber helped the National League win the All-Star game with 3 home runs. Why are the Phillies so much better than the Pittsburgh Pirates year after year?
That's a great question. I will fully disclose, I do not follow the Phillies as acutely or as passionately as I should. So,
all right, well, then I'll answer my own question. It's because of ownership. All right, that's going to do it for us right now. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, RealClear Politics. You've been listening to Charles McElwee, who's editor of RealClear Pennsylvania. But don't go away. We'll be right back with more RealClear Politics after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. And for our next segment, RCP contributor Maggie Miller talks with Real Clear Investigations writer Paul Sperry about his most recent article. It tells us what newly declassified CIA documents reveal about the Steele dossier, which played a critical role in the U.S. intelligence community's assessment, claiming that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump. The full story can be found on RealClearInvestigations.com. And now here's Maggie Miller in conversation with Paul Sperry.
Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you.
So the Steele dossier was criticized from the beginning. Seeing now that it did have a direct role in the assessment that pointed to Russian interference, what does this change within the Russiagate narrative?
Well, John Brennan, it turns out that he actually slipped the Hillary's dirty dossier into the actual text of that intelligence assessment of Russia. And then he turned around and lied about it to Congress repeatedly. And he thought he could get away with it because he classified it at such a high level that even Congress couldn't see it, that section. But now he's under federal investigation by DOJ and FBI, along with James Comey, the former FBI director. And we found some of the testimony that they gave, false testimony that they gave back in 2020 and 2023. And those dates are important, those years, because they fall within the 5-year statute of limitation for perjury. So these are fully prosecutable offenses if they pan out.
So what would you say about may come from the potential misconduct from those officials like Brennan, Clapper, Comey with those sworn testimonies? Do we see this coming to light? Do we see people actively pursuing this?
There's definitely a criminal referral from the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, who put out this CIA review. It's an 8-page review that really started all of this, and found out through a number of emails that John Brennan was fibbing big time. And so he referred that for criminal investigation to the Justice Department, and that actually has happened. And the FBI has it and is actively investigating not only Brennan, but James Comey, as we understand. We also understand from our reporting that they're looking at this DOJ as also a conspiracy case, conspiracy to commit perjury, conspiracy to obstruct justice, which is a much broader case. And the statute of limitations does not apply to such conspiracy cases.
So how did the Steele dossier really permeate within the intelligence apparatus? And then, many said that Russiagate was a political witch hunt when it came out, but how did these new findings undermine the narrative of neutrality that is expected from within our intelligence community?
Yeah, so it looks like from what they found in this CIA review that they really did cook up this intelligence, and it was led by Brennan. Now, the ICA stands for the Intelligence Community Assessment, and this is something that President Obama ordered back in 2016, within weeks of Trump, his surprise upset victory over Hillary Clinton. And the main conclusion is basically that Putin basically installed Trump as president. And that just happens to echo the allegations in the dossier, which were bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign, which is pretty outrageous that they would dress that dossier up as intelligence and put it into this major assessment. But that's what they did. They knew it was opposition research, and yet they included it not just as a sidebar, but in the actual main body of the, that's what we're finding out. It's in the main body of the classified version of the ICA. And that's just outrageous because they knew it was a Hillary Clinton opposition research smear at the time that they were manufacturing this intelligence.
I mean, it's interesting because obviously within your piece, you're noting that there were arguments that, oh, it was just a footnote, but it had no standing in our investigation and in our findings. And now to see that not only was it not a footnote, but that it did have a major role is definitely interesting. And it's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward.
Absolutely. And that was a mantra on the part of Clapper, McCabe, Comey, Brennan, and all of these appearances before Congress. And also they misled John Derms, the special counsel's investigation. They told him that no, it was never inside the assessment. And now we know that it was a part of the main body of the assessment. And then we also found out that John Brennan is caught in some other whoppers, whereby he said that he had nothing to do with the dossier when he at the time. And so we found a transcript of a closed door deposition he gave to the House Judiciary Committee. This is back in 2023, which is within the statute of limitations. quote, "I was not involved in analyzing the dossier at all. The first time I actually saw it was after the election, and CIA was not involved at all with the dossier. But now we know from these emails that were released from the CIA report that in fact there were emails from Brennan himself where he says, hey, the bottom line is I want this dossier included." So there's all sorts of smoking guns that contradict all of this spin and these statements that they gave under oath. Raised their right hand in all these cases, and but you know, we're starting to see some accountability because they have been held to a different standard for a number of years. Because all of Trump's people a lot of them were prosecuted and went to jail for perjury, including false statements to Congress. So this has happened in the past in high-profile cases, and yet these guys have skated for what we're going on 9 years now. And so it's a little refreshing that they're finally maybe held to account, but we will see what actually happens. And we're doing a follow-up on this story because there's a 200-page document that has been locked up in a vault all this time, probably back to 2018, that reveals even worse details than anything in the CIA review. And we're going to reveal some of those details about how Brennan and company, his crew, manipulated and even falsified some of these conclusions that were in that assessment. So
wow.
Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that seems like it's just going to continue to add fuel to this story that some people might have thought might have been, as you said, 8-9 years in the past and haven't really thought about, but it seems like it's very much, blowing up a little bit right now.
This is what you call a delayed fuse on this scandal. Part of the reason is because the legacy media is so invested in the original narrative, which was Trump was compromised by the Kremlin, the whole Russiagate, Russia thing. And they won Pulitzers. The Washington Post, New York Times for this. And they mentioned the ICA as backup to their stories, which we're now finding out the ICA was largely a fraud. And so they are part of the cover-up right now. They don't want this to come out. And so it's a constant pushing past the main media. They've been blocking this.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're not being deterred. Is there anything you'd like to leave people with regards to your investigation?
Well, I think that what people understand is this is probably one of the worst political scandals in our history, because we knew that they laundered Hillary's dirty dossier through the FISA wiretap court to spy on Trump. We've already established that through the Inspector General of the Justice Department in the Durham report. But now we're finding out that they laundered the dossier through the intelligence services to try to frame Trump as this Putin stooge who's controlled by Russia. And that is a huge scandal, that they would frame him and then create this pretext for endless investigations of him that really hamstrung, dogged his first term. And quite frankly, there's still a cloud over him. People are still, especially in Washington, doubting any motives he has in terms of any type of foreign policy related to Russia. So this is still a major issue.
It definitely is. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time.
That was Maggie Miller in conversation with Real Clear Investigations writer Paul Sperry. You can see more of Maggie's interviews on the Real Clear Politics YouTube channel and at realclearinvestigations.com. That's our program for today. On behalf of everyone at RCP, thank you for listening. We'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.